I'm super excited to welcome today Jeff Carreira to the Conscious Evolution Summit. Jeff, before I start with some questions for you, I just want to give a brief introduction. So you are a contemporary mystic, a spiritual guide, a philosopher, and you basically teach people around the world, teach them about meditation. And you also created a unique practice, which you call the practice of no problem. And this is, of course, very, very curious and exciting. And you wrote many, many different books all about the newest one is called, I guess, something about crossing dimensions.
Transdimensional crossing. It's actually it's a novel, so it's a departure from my normal writing.
Yeah, and many other books. And I experience you as a person who deeply speaks from really experience. You experience really deep states of altered states of consciousness and really moving into different dimensions. And I'm really curious about to hear from you what brought you onto this journey and what experiences were so crucial to you to dedicate basically your whole life to find out and to share with people about our deeper nature.
Right. Well, it's interesting, that particular question, because what brought me to all of this was a mystery even to me until quite a distance into the path. So I was always, from a young age, questioning, fundamentally, particularly questioning my relationship to my mind. You know, I would lock myself in my father's car when I was about 8 or 9 years old and try and stop my mind from thinking. And when I was in my early teens, I used to like to lay outside on the ground so that I could feel the earth moving underneath me. And then I would feel connected to the stars. I never quite understood what I was supposed to be doing in the world. And, you know, I was a fairly good student just because I wanted to not get in trouble. But I wasn't particularly interested in anything. And and then I got a career. I became an engineer initially, and I met a spiritual teacher and did something that there was no precedent for in my life, which is leave my life completely on dime and enter a spiritual community that I lived in for the next 20 years. There was nothing about my background that would have made that a reasonable choice. So of course, pretty much everyone thought I'd gone mad, including myself at times. And about 10 years into that, 20 years, when I was now 39 years old, I was on a long meditation retreat. And at one point in the meditation, I felt my eyes start to lift out of my body. And then they lifted up through the roof of the meditation hall. And then they went up so that I could see the whole town on the ground. And then eventually I could see the round sphere of the earth. And then the earth was just a little dot in a field of stars. And at some point I attained a size in which it felt as if the entire cosmos was inside my body. And then there was this feeling of just energetic release and perfect love and peace and calm. And in that moment, everything was perfect. And then when I was totally satisfied, which I don't know how long it took, there's no sense of time, but then it just shrunk all down again. And then I eventually came back into the room and then back into my body. And when I got back into my body, I remembered, oh my God, I used to do that all the time when I was little. And I remembered being like, 3 years old, 4 years old, and I would go into the bathroom and I would lock myself in my parents' house, and I would stare into my own eyes in the mirror, and I would blow up just like that until I was as big as the cosmos. And then I would sink back down, and then I would leave. And I remembered distinctly the day that couldn't happen anymore. I kept staring into my own eyes, but I couldn't remember how to do it. I don't know how old I was, but I realized, oh, that was the beginning. That's why I never understood what I was supposed to be doing in school. That's why nothing really ever interested in me, because those experiences when I was young, even though I had somehow managed to forget them completely, wouldn't let me be satisfied with anything that was just a normal, conventional life. So that's the answer to that. It was very gratifying to remember why this all got started. And I often tell people, if they're very compelled by the spiritual path, there very well might be early childhood experiences that they've completely forgotten. We all are very aware that many people have early traumatic experiences that they forget, right? And that then shape their whole lives. But I think a lot of people also have early spiritual experiences that they forget. And then they don't really know why they're so compelled by spiritual practices and spiritual teachers and retreats. But it's because they've had this kind of opening, which makes sense, because if you had never had the opening, why would it be interesting?
Yeah.
I mean, you have to have a very charismatic teacher to make it interesting, because it's, from a cultural and social point of view, there's nothing that compelling about it.
Yeah, and I mean, I totally can relate to what you shared, because I had quite similar experiences, and I mean, for quite a while, as I wasn't really in a family environment or surrounded by people with whom I could talk about that or could share about that, and I even had no books where I would read about it, I felt so kind of wrong in this world, and I didn't feel really called to all these things which we are supposed to reach, to enter to, because they didn't make sense for me. They didn't feel fulfilling. And I even had a period where I thought, this is the most profound thing, or to think is not a good word, but a profound understanding, so that maybe I can just die, because nothing else would be there more valuable for me to reach to. So that was also a period until I kind of found out that maybe just to hold it, to embody it, and sometimes share about it, but sometimes even not talking about it, I just noticed that it already made a difference in meeting people. Yeah.
Wow, great.
Yeah, and I guess many of the listeners and people watching this interview might have similar experiences, and
Absolutely
have difficulties to kind of bring them into their life. And yeah, so you really cultivated then methods and techniques to enable people to have similar experience. And how did it come? How did you develop them?
Well, I mean, some things I've developed. Some things are, like the practice of no problem it's I think there's a lot of reasons why that's a really good way to think about meditation, and very accessible to a lot of people. I wouldn't exactly say it's different than classical. There's classic meditations, sometimes just spoken about as open awareness meditation or just sitting. And it's not any different than that kind of practice. It's just it's a unique instruction that I think is well suited to our times. Other things that have more to do with philosophical inquiry and ways of looking into our experience, I've developed from study of a lot of very interesting philosophical thinkers, both modern day and historical. And interestingly, my meditation background and the spiritual awakening background is very much inspired by the Eastern traditions, and particularly the line of Ramana Maharshi. But the evolutionary part, which, you know, when we get into it, you'll see I have uncertainties about the whole idea of evolution. But anyway, it's a different question. But a lot of that more like what I prefer to call paradigm shifting, rather, I prefer to use the language of paradigm shifting over the language of evolution. But that part of what I teach largely comes from Western thinkers in the Western philosophical canon, because at some point I started to realize that when you start to read some of the great Western thinkers, you know, initially I was very inspired by some of the American thinkers like Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau and William James. You start to realize, oh, you know, John Dewey in the late 1900s and early 2000s was talking about conscious evolution in very much the same ways we talk about it now. So you start to realize that the idea of conscious evolution was, you know, really, at least in this modern version, was sort of born in the, you know, the mid 1800s. It sort of, you know, came along more or less at the same time that Darwin's evolution of theories, theory of evolution, theory of natural selection emerged in 1859, because he was looking at it from a very biological point of view. But even prior to Darwin, you know, an English philosopher named Herbert Spencer was kind of promoting a version of more like conscious evolution. And I can't remember his name, but there was a preacher in New England at the time who had thousands of followers, and he literally was teaching a kind of spiritual conscious evolution as a Christian pastor. And so many people would come to his services, I think he was in New York, that they would park boats to listen to him from the water. And because there were just so many people that were inspired by this message, you know, the idea of evolution was new. It was a new science that was starting to be discovered. And he was saying, well, this is all part of, you know, God's divine plan, that we should participate in moving ourselves closer to the divine through an evolutionary process. And so I got inspired by that. And then, of course, I had to go start to read the European philosophers that the Americans were inspired by. And I saw how it all connected. And so it's just been a journey. It's, you know, basically been my own curiosity and the work I've done with various teachers, and also inspired by readings and friends and peers. So, you know, whether anything is truly originally developed is something I also wonder about. But it all emerges somehow through the mix of activities that we engage in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what did you find out? What really makes sense for you to enable us to make this paradigm shift?
Well, I think, and this kind of gets to some of my uncertainties about the idea of conscious evolution. I mean, it's a beautiful term. And of course, Barbara Marx Hubbard has recently left us, and I want to certainly pay all my respects to her. I had numerous occasions to spend time with her and talk with her on the phone. She was a beautiful woman and profoundly inspired and deeply sincere in her love of humanity and desire to help us all move on, you know, beyond where we were. That all being said, like with any term, you know, with over time, it starts to become a something. And, you know, they say in the beginning of anything, there's no opportunity for conforming. You know, when something's brand new, you can't really have a conformist. So everyone who gets involved has to be a kind of radical, because it's too new. There's not enough meat there to conform to. But if over time, as it becomes a thing, then a lot of the good part of that is it becomes available to a lot more people. The challenging part is it can start to get bogged down in fixed ideas. It loses some of its life, And in terms of conscious evolution, I think the thing that I would want to say is I don't believe evolution is something that we do. And sometimes the idea of conscious evolution gets translated into it's some kind of superhuman activity. It's not really a human activity, at least not in the way that we think about ourselves generally. So if we can participate in evolution in a conscious way, you asked, well, what's the thing that makes it possible? What makes it possible is if we stop doing anything, if we let go and we allow it to happen. I mean, this is the great opportunity here is, I think the idea of conscious evolution can be tricky. I think the great opportunity here is, we were one with the evolutionary stream, right? There's just an evolutionary stream unfolding. And then at some point, human beings seem to take this side trip of separation, sort of separating ourselves out with a self-image, becoming this kind of self-reflective creature that can hold an image of itself as separate from the whole in a way that seems to be unique, maybe not entirely unique, but certainly rare in the animal kingdom, especially to the degree that we've done it, where we really have separated ourselves so far from the whole of which we're a part that we can even be living on a planet that we're destroying and find it difficult to stop, right? That's how separate we are from the whole, which is often seen as just a negative thing, but I don't see it as a negative thing. I think it's got negative side effects, especially if we remain separate, because we're getting so powerful, but then that the power of having this incredible capacity for abstract thinking and to create images and pictures of the world, that power is in the hands of a sense of self that's limited to a physical body and doesn't recognize its connection to the whole. So the big opportunity of conscious evolution is for us to let go of the sense of separation, to let go of all of our ideas about ourselves and also all of our ideas about evolution and also all our ideas, right? So this is kind of brings us back to the realm of many of the great Enlightenment traditions. You let go of all of that and you allow evolution to happen. But now evolution is going to have all of this higher mental capacity to work with, right? So the evolution will be conscious, but it's not us being conscious of evolution, right? It's evolution having this new capacity for abstract thought that it didn't have when it was, just picking the species that could eat the best in the wilderness to survive. It now has a different possibility to work with. Mm-hmm. But if we hold all the power in the hands of the separate sense of self, we're seriously inhibiting a new potential in evolution that wants to happen. So that's why I would say the most important message is that conscious evolution, first and foremost, involves a kind of letting go of the process, allowing the process to happen, because evolution it's not a construction project like building a house. It's a growth, and you don't participate in growth. You don't pull on the head of a child to make it grow. It grows by itself. What you do is you create the right atmosphere for healthy growth, and you allow growth to happen. You can stunt growth, but you can't really make it happen. It's going to happen anyway. The question is it going to happen in ways that are beneficial and beautiful? And does it have the right environment for that? And we need to be more concerned with creating an environment for growth to happen in and being available to be taken somewhere that we can't imagine.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise we limit evolution to our ability to imagine it. And then that's very, God, if evolution is limited to human imagination, it's not that exciting. Can I give you one more example of something that bothers me about, because you have to realize in the spiritual community I was in, we were very early adopters of evolutionary spirituality. So my life for the past 25 years ago became about conscious evolution in a very intensive, single pointed way. And there were things we talked about then, or ways we talked then, that maybe was appropriate at the time. And, the slogan "evolution is something you do" was a popular one among us, and I understand how that can be a step forward from evolution is something that has nothing to do with you, right, to evolution is something you do. But then I can also see how it then puts it in the hands of the ego in a way that was never intended, but it's an inevitable consequence. But another thing that I really would like people to question, and again, I don't mean no disrespect to anyone, because there's always multiple sides to every story, but there's a side I want to point out today, which is that I think our whole embrace of the evolutionary narrative of a big bang, and then evolution through time, which includes energy and particles that collide and eventually form stars and planets, and on at least one planet something called life emerges, and then among life something called consciousness emerges, and then I just think that whole narrative is ultimately a trap for evolution, because I don't believe in linear time as some kind of like limit on what's possible. I believe it exists in our experience, of course. And many people who are proponents of conscious evolution at other times also seem not to be believers in linear time. And yet our evolutionary model is embedded in an idea of limited, so that's why I prefer the term paradigm shifting, because I like to think that this whole evolutionary model of the Big Bang and the progression to now, and we tend to think that evolution is going to be further along that line of time. It's going to be the next step. But I think actually it's more useful to think that entire picture of reality was something that evolved over the last few hundred years. It didn't exist before, right? It's just an idea that came into focus at a certain point, and evolution is going to go sort of past it. That line of time goes this way, but evolution goes this way, and so there'll be a paradigm shift or a leap. The kind of evolution that excites me is more like a dimensional shift than a progression in time. And so that's why one needs to be available for it, because we are time-bound psyches. And so, there's many parallels, because, evolution and awakening, excuse me, evolution and awakening have many parallels. We think we're the ones that are evolving. So we think that there's going to be some kind of evolutionary process and that we're going to be there on the other side, but we're not actually going to be there. That's the whole point, right? We're a stage of evolution that life is going to move beyond. The dinosaurs aren't around. If they were thinking about conscious evolution as sort of the evolution of dinosaurs, like, oh, we're going to be new dinosaurs with new capacities. That's not the way it worked. Life took on new forms and new possibilities beyond that form. Mm-hmm. So if that form is thinking of itself as something that's going to evolve into new forms, of course, it's holding evolution back. Now, people will say, yes, but evolution today isn't really going to be a physical evolution. It's going to be the evolution at the level of consciousness. Okay, that might be true, but first of all, I'd like to leave open the possibility that we don't know if that's the way it's going to work. I don't have a blueprint for how evolution works, so who knows what's going to be here. But second of all, I realize that's a more reasonable way to look at it. But even looking at it that reasonable way, as our consciousness evolves, or as consciousness evolves, it will also dramatically change our sense of self. So in effect, we won't be there anyway. Maybe the physical meat will still be there, but the sense of self, which is what we're actually identified with the most, is the thing that's getting evolved beyond. And are we ready for that? Are we ready for Jeff and his history and his ideas about himself and everything he thinks he is to become utterly irrelevant in the face of something completely new? And are we going to step into what's completely new? Are we ready to make that big leap into the unknown? Or are we going to hold evolution to some idea of Jeff evolving through time, or even humanity evolving through time in a way that limits evolution to the current form that evolution has taken? So these are just some of this is why I often don't do these kind of summits, just because I'm not sure what to say. So when you invited me and I know we have some mutual background, and I felt compelled to say yes. So then I had to get up earlier this morning so I could think about, okay, what am I going to say that will feel really authentic to what I feel and won't sound too negative, because I think all of this in the domain of conscious evolution is doing a lot of good for a lot of people. And I think it's all generally pushing us forward, for sure. It's nothing wrong with it. And I think there are views that get spoken about less that probably at this point need to be spoken about more.
Yeah, and this exactly is what makes me so happy that you said yes to this invitation, because we have quite a lot more in common than I thought, because the idea you shared before, I even would add, I don't know if when I evolve and when I move into the next dimension, into whatever you want to call it, if this would mean that my physical body would come with me.
Right.
I'm also open to the possibility that what I kind of say, that's me, and I'm totally sure that I know I am not this body, yeah. So, but it's hard to tell what I am. So I'm open to experience an ongoing journey to experience what is it really what I am. I wouldn't say I know it. Yeah, I just know that I had some insights what I'm not. And I'm absolutely open to this possibility that where we step into might also have the consequence that we have a different form to operate. Maybe it's visible, maybe it's not visible. And for me, that's not negative at all. For me, this kind of, it's realistic, it's open, it doesn't bring so many limits. I also don't believe in a linear story. So yeah, I'm very happy to have someone in this conversation who shares that. And please share a bit more ideas you have.
Well, based on what you just said, there's a lot of people who are very excited, and I don't know what I believe is going to happen. I don't particularly know, but there's a lot of people who are very excited about the mix of biology with computers and technology, and see some new form of human or new form of life occurring, which is some blend of human produced elements and biology. So, I mean, who knows? It's fun for science fiction, and might be true. It is actually becoming true if you think about it. I mean, the way that we relate to our iPhones is almost like an extension of our psyche. I marvel all the time seeing people constantly on their iPhones, myself being one of them often, and knowing that this is allowing us to stay connected to people all over. And it's expanding our sense of self and our sense of agency beyond the limits of the human body. And so it's happening that we're melding with technology in certain ways, and our consciousness is going to be shifted by that. Okay, so since we're on the various topics, here's another thing that I think is good for people to consider, goes along with some of what I've said. We can't underestimate the gravitational attractive force of our success-oriented, achievement-oriented psyche and ego, and the influence of economic factors in anything that we do, right? So as the idea of conscious evolution becomes more popular, it also becomes more of a commodity that can be sold. And another reason why as I'm sure everyone does who participates in these or who holds them as you do, and I do my own versions of things like this, so it's not like I don't participate, but there's always this uncomfortable marriage of marketing and authentic spiritual pursuit that we can never get to, we should never get comfortable with, because it's very difficult to maintain a relationship to all of this that is not influenced by economic factors. So, sometimes, and I know that you interviewed my good friend and teaching partner, Craig Hamilton, and that's part of our connection. And he and I, because we get to be friends and we both teach these kinds of things, are often able to be in a conversation with each other about this, about what keeps what we're doing aligned. See, fundamentally, I come to conscious evolution from the sort of spiritual side of the street, so to speak, right? I wasn't interested in conscious evolution initially. I was interested in God realization and surrender to the divine. So at some point you see, evolution is at least an aspect of the divine, and it requires surrender in the same way. So coming at it from that point of view, which is also, that's the background that Craig and I share, we have the opportunity to be in the question of, how do you know you're surrendering to the divine? How do you know you're really doing the higher work of whatever you want to call it, divinity, the sacred, evolution, if that's the term you want to use for the higher power that's working? How do you know your work is aligned with that? It would be easier. Well, it would be easier to be certain if you were just, which I often have the fantasy of just, getting a small property and getting a few people and just doing spiritual practice and producing creative endeavors, that express our inner, that if sort of my ideal of heaven is to be living with a group of people who are mutually inspired to surrender to the divine, to let go of the world and experience higher states and higher dimensions ongoingly, and then bring those back through creative endeavors, through conversation, through new business ventures, whatever it is. The whole idea is to allow higher spirit to create a new world through us. And I ultimately, all the things that I teach are sort of inspired by that vision. And sometimes I just think, it would be probably better to just go and sort of do it, put a gate around yourself so that you feel free of the influence of the world, which is, it's nothing but the old monastic impulse, in a modern context. But I don't feel that that's my calling. I lived a life a lot like that for some time, and it doesn't feel like it's my calling now. It feels like my calling now is to expand that kind of possibility using the technologies of the internet and means that allow us to connect non-locally, so that we can create a sort of ashram virtually with periodic in-person opportunities that allows the same kind of collective letting go to something higher in order to allow the wisdom and insight and perspectives and visions from there to infuse our lives and start to manifest in concrete reality, which kind of lifts us up to be able to go even further into other dimensions and other planes and bring down possibilities that then pick our feet up a little higher so that we can get even further, and just to continue and to continue and to continue. That's the version of conscious evolution that I'm most inspired by, is the constantly releasing ourselves from fixed ideas and from knowing of all kinds, entering into the mystery of the unknown, allowing ourselves to be completely swept away and taken. And then once we are, the part of us that's in the world, is then doing its best to manifest as concretely as possible the new possibilities that it's experienced. And as I said, that kind of creates a little bit higher ground under our feet that allows us to leap into new possibilities. And, that's thrilling. So Craig and I get to talk sometimes about, okay, because when you're in the world that we're in, this is a world that runs on a certain economic basis. And to one part of my ego, it would be very satisfying to be, kind of living on my own, separate from the world, and, living off the earth so that I could feel completely free of any economic influences. But of course, that could just be my ego wanting to feel like it was free of economic influences. That doesn't necessarily, I don't know what the ultimate value of that would be. I don't know, maybe, it's hard to know. It could be, because something so extraordinary could happen out there in the woods by myself or with a few people that the whole world would change. But it's just not what I feel called to. I feel called to creating a kind of, what I like to call a kind of modern day, non-local mystery school that allows people to explore higher possibilities and find ways to bring them back to life. But we all, myself and you and all of us on this telesummit, cannot help but have to navigate the entanglement with the current economic system. And so much of our consciousness is held in the economic system. So much of our values are held collectively in the economic system that we participate in. It's hard to imagine, one of the things we're going to need to evolve beyond is our current economic system. And so how do you evolve beyond the current economic system while you're sort of in a situation where you need to participate in it? One way is to not participate in it. People do that. They just go off the grid. And I think that's really valuable. I don't know that that's the solution. I don't know that the ultimate solution is we're just going to all go off the grid. That's the kind of thing when you see people do that, which is very inspiring because it shows a different possibility for life. But I have chosen to live in the center of Philadelphia, which is a big urban city. And it's not the normal choice for spiritually minded types, but for whatever reason, I sort of felt called to the idea of being an urban shaman and going where people needed help. I could go, I could live in a much more beautiful place, but if you wanted to try to be available for people, this is a great place. There's millions of them, and they're all struggling to survive.
Yeah, and Jeff, I would like to go a bit back in what you shared, because I found that really crucial, and I deeply believe that many people are in this situation. What you just shared in your conversations with Craig, and this is kind of, I also found myself into that situation by setting up the summit, is you ask these questions: how do I really know that I really follow this divine calling, that I really follow it? And I mean, I got feedback from some speakers, because I'm not well known. I did this last year the first time. And for example, also Craig said, usually I don't say yes to invitations like that. I receive them, hundreds of them every week. But I felt your innocent, sincere wish to investigate and to share with the world what is really meaningful with you. And this is the best how I can explain why I do this, because it's my innocent calling to do it, even though I'm not a technical person, I'm not a journalist or known very well. I just follow it. But I'm so curious if you could give us hints, what supports us to be as clear as possible. Do we really follow that divine impulse? And the only thing what I know, that I never have a fixed answer. It's a process which I need to participate in moment by moment by moment. This is what I know.
Right. Awesome. And just as an aside, the fact that you were associated with Craig was probably the biggest reason why I said yes. And particularly because he had said yes, and I know that he doesn't do these. So, that sort of, I thought, like, okay, well, if it's okay, if Craig feels like it's okay, it must be okay. And and the fact that you're not well known is appealing to me. It's that does make it feel more organic and innocent. This is not like you've done hundreds of these and you do them all the time, and that would feel very unappealing to me. But in terms of the question you're asking, first of all, what you said is true. You can't know, right? There's no way to know for sure ever. And if you ever think you know, that's probably a dangerous place to be in, because it's very easy to be deluded and think you're totally pure and find out later there was all kinds of stuff going on. And so you just, you have to be uncertain about it and live with the uncertainty of it and allow yourself to not know. And then you do the best you can, of course. And one of the things that I find helpful personally is I think about different possibilities. Like I think about, what if I was called to just step out of the teaching role that I'm in, for instance, and I was called to just work in a soup kitchen in Philadelphia and help people. And I try to imagine, if I was called in that way, how available would I be? Am I available? Am I willing? Because, if you're not called, you don't have to do it, but you have to keep asking yourself, am I willing to go wherever I'm called? And how will I know? Everything can be usurped by the ego. Everything can become an activity that the ego is interested in. And then the ego's in control again. And even the idea that I'm surrendered to my, these impulses can become something, okay, the ego gets on board with everything. That's the,
And how would you discern? How?
You can't necessarily. I mean, what you do is you look at the results of your actions, and then you take responsibility for whatever happens. There's really, it's a simple formula. You do your best to hear the call of spirit. When you hear it, you give yourself to it completely. You never allow yourself to be so certain that you're not paying attention. And then you pay attention to what the effects of your actions are, and you take complete responsibility for whatever part you had in whatever happened. And so if you're, I believe, and who knows, again, this can't leave you comfortable, but I believe that if you really are allowing yourself to be authentically uncertain, and you're really taking responsibility for the results, the results of what you're doing, which means when it's not going the right way, you make amends and clean up the karmic consequence, and you shift, right? I mean, what can you do? That's kind of the best we can do with the limited amount of perspective that we have. And if people are overly certain that they have some kind of unquestioned vision of what's next, what's being called for, I have a hard time trusting that. It's that kind of certainty. That kind of certainty makes the ego strong, right? It's not to say that it's not true either, because I don't want to say if it's certain, then you can't trust it. That's also not true, because some things feel certain too. That's why it's the staying in the unknown is key. But I guess I also, and this is personal, right? These things are personal. How do I navigate? I don't have any rules that I know are good, but I also just have a personal belief that these kinds of pursuits should lead to people being happier and more unified. It should increase happiness and solidarity and prosperity and health, right? This is not, I just think I think there's an inherent goodness to the process of life, and that inherent goodness will manifest. So I think if we start looking around and seeing that our actions are generating unhappiness, lack of prosperity, isolation and separation, and things of that sort, then I would question. And now that could be totally personal, because someone could say, well, maybe you need to do that at certain levels in order to evolve beyond it. That's possible. But my calling, whatever, what moves my heart is not that direction. What moves my heart is the direction that leads to, I like to see people happier, more fulfilled, closer to each other, a deeper sense of solidarity, deeper sense of meaning and purpose. That makes my heart sing, and I trust that. St. John of the Cross talked about the dark night of the soul, by which he didn't mean, us getting through hard times. He meant, how are you going to develop the kind of vision that will allow you to see in the darkness? What is it that you're going to be able to perceive, that your heart can perceive, that you can then follow when your eyes don't see? So your eyes don't see the way forward. They don't see how evolution's progressing, but my heart opens to people coming together in happiness and prosperity and mutual fulfillment. And so I trust that if that's what my heart opens to, then that's the direction I'm supposed to go in. That doesn't mean it's the right direction for everybody. It doesn't, I don't believe there's a right direction for everybody. I believe we all have to listen to the calling of our own heart and surrender to what it's calling to, and remain completely uncertain and vigilant all the time, and aware so that we can course correct as we feel, as we're moved to. And if there's any way in which we want to find certainty in all of this, there really isn't any place to find certainty. This is why faith, you have to find faith, faith in the process of life, and faith in your own capacity to navigate the uncertainty of it all. And if you're doing that, I don't know what else you can do. You just, and of course, having a circle of people around you that share your interests, that you are able to be open and sincere with, can really help, because we can often see each other more easily than we can see ourselves. And it's not that you should ever surrender necessarily to a group or to an individual, but I think we all do well to be open to the perspective of others. We don't want to cut ourselves off from other people's perspectives. At the same time, we don't want to cut ourselves off from our own inner knowing either. So everything is some kind of dance that we have to do. And I have not found any easy answers for how to navigate, except to navigate.
I'm so happy, Jeff, that you brought this perspectives into the summit. I really feel it really is enriching the collection of what I try to offer our audience. And we are now coming to the end of our conversation, but I would like to hear from you to end our conversation. And you already kind of dig into it with your last sentences, but maybe I want to highlight it again. What is the value of us coming together in physical groups, or like in a telesummit like this, with this honest finding out and going into the unknown and really being open, as you said, also being open to what really opens our heart and what helps us to live in unity together. What is the value of we not doing this just as individuals, but coming together? What makes or what is possible then?
Right. That's great. And the first thing I would want to say is the idea that we're ever individuals is probably one that we should question. We're always a collection of all kinds of historical events that have happened to us, and not only that, but because we read and we have access to media, we're influenced by and shaped by historical figures, and there's so much that makes us what we are. To call ourselves an individual can be misleading now, and that isn't to deny the uniqueness of that there is something that's unique over here, but what exactly that is, I don't really know what it is. It's not my personality. It's not my ideas about myself. So, I mean, I guess the thing that comes to my mind in terms of the value of coming together is, I believe that growth, we're nurturing growth, right? It's like a garden. You can't pull the seeds. There's nothing you can do to a seed to make it grow. You just have to put it in an environment in which growth occurs, right? And part of the environment in which life evolves seems to be having access to multiple perspectives. So at the level of consciousness, the more vantage points you have, the richer the field of growth to happen. If it's you all by yourself, again, you're never you all by yourself. That's one of the things that I want to say. But to the extent that you can be you all by yourself, there's certain kinds of growth that are possible there, but other kinds that are not possible because you don't have the advantage of an external perspective. But if you have two external perspectives, then you get, you have more perspective. 3 is more perspective. 4 is more. So accumulating a rich field of perspective that it's not like there's a one-to-one correspondence, but that field has a potency to it that allows for vision to expand. It's almost like you start to connect to everyone else's vision. And in some of my deepest experiences in the community in which I worked were experiences of collective consciousness, where suddenly what we all thought we were separate individuals, and then suddenly a source of awareness emerges between us, and it becomes completely obvious that you're the only one in the room, not Jeff, of course, right? Jeff is also in the room, and so is everybody else, but you are the only one actually in the room, this collective place, and then you just keep speaking through the different perspectives because you find which perspective is offering what you need to say right now. And you start to realize that all of this can be looked at as a kind of orchestrated collective awareness. And so by coming together, we seem to be able to ignite this rich field of multiple perspectives. And then, of course, as individuals, the more that we do the kind of work that we've been talking about, to be clear about following the depths of our heart and clear about following the call of spirit, the more unblemished perspective we have to offer. So we're offering a perspective that has less of our personal biases. I don't know if it's ever possible to have none of our personal biases or aberrations, to the lens, but we want to endeavor to be offering our unique perspective, right? There's something about our perspective that's unique that nobody else has. And we want to offer it in as clear a form as possible with other people who are offering unique perspectives in as clear a form as possible, so that we all get the vantage point of this sort of multidimensional seeing. And it's, albeit its most rudimentary form, it's a little clunky for us to share from these bodies. I can tell you what I see and you tell me what you see. And, you can see in our conversation, the conversation goes back and forth. The two sides, you and me, we get sparked. I wouldn't be having the kinds of thoughts I'm having right now if I weren't sitting with you, and you wouldn't be having the thoughts you're having if you weren't sitting with me. If we hadn't had this interview and I was sitting here by myself, something completely different would happen. So we influence one another, and there's always a resultant consciousness that occurs in the interaction. And as you have more people to participate, then that consciousness has the advantage of more and more perspectives. And I think that's it's a crucial part. And, I guess the other thing that I would say is it gets very interesting, but we don't live alone. Mm-hmm. We live together, so we also need to evolve together. We need to grow together because we don't have an individual life. My life isn't separate from everybody else's, right? It's influenced in every way, from the gross to the subtle, by the existence of others. How I live, the physical space I live in, what I say, what I think, what I do, it's all part of an enmeshed collective of individuals, which is why it feels different to live in Center City, Philadelphia, than it would feel to live in, rural Pennsylvania, because you have a different relational field. And the last thing I would want to say is, I believe also that one of the limitations we have to be careful about is when we start to talk about collective awakening, is that we don't limit it to human collectives, that we are in relationship with beings of all types. Some are manifest, some are not manifest. Some are human, some are not human. Some fit our current definition of living, some don't fit our current definition of living, but they're all beings as far as I'm concerned. And they're all part of the field of mutual effect that we're a part of. And evolution doesn't really happen for part of that field. It happens for the whole. So, we want to realize that it's the whole of life that's evolving. And then that evolution will show up in different ways for different seemingly separate aspects. but it's not that we are an individual person or even an individual species that's evolving somehow separate from the rest, right? Because it's all one. So maybe a particular advancement of evolution shows up in one species, but that must be, as far as I'm concerned, this is like Jeff's personal opinions about stuff, that must be a reflection of an evolution that's occurring in the whole, right? Because where would you draw the line to say this species evolved but that one didn't? Like, at what point do you say, is it the skin? You say, okay, the skin's the border, or is it what I'm mentally aware? Where's the line? It's kind of like I ask people, we say we were born on our birthday. Where's the line? Like, before which you didn't exist and after which you did exist, It certainly isn't the moment that you emerged from your mother's womb, right? But is it the moment when, was it the moment when the sperm hit the egg? Were you not there and then all of a sudden you were there? I don't think so, right? I think we were there before there was any physical evidence of our being there. And my deepest experiences of meditation are slipping into a consciousness that is beyond the waking state, and it's beyond the dreaming state, and it's beyond the sleep state. It's present throughout, and it's indestructible, right? And it was there before this body appeared, and it will be there after this body drops. And the existence of that kind of awareness and that depth of being means that evolution can't be about a single individual or a single species. And so it's a great approximation of kind of collectivity to have a group of people together to share perspectives. It's a small approximation compared to the larger family of beings. It's one of the things that I love about the shamanic tradition that I studied in Hawaii, and that you evidently studied, is they talk a lot about your ancestors. And ancestors are not limited to just, obviously not just people in your family, but also not just humans, right? Everything's ancestors. Emotions are ancestors. Physical objects are ancestors. Other animals are, everything is part of the family of which you're a part. And so bringing collectives together gives us the advantage of multiple perspectives. It also allows us to start to expand our sense of self into the larger family of beings that we're never separate from.
Thank you so much, Jeff. I appreciate personally a lot that I had the chance to have this conversation with you, someone who also has this deep love to live in questions, to be in uncertainty, to open to the unknown. And I deeply also enjoyed just here at the end pointing out and inviting also all kinds of beings in the seen and the unseen. So thank you so much for bringing your unique perspectives to this summit. I appreciate it a lot. Thank you for joining, Jeff.
You're very welcome. Thank you so much for inviting. This was a lot of fun.